of geology in the Bible. There was a lot of events that would have left a mark somewhere. After 9 months, I got to Matthew chapter 27, the day that Jesus died. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. I kept reading. About 36 hours later, I read in Matthew chapter 28. After Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake. What the heck it is that happened on that day? My name is Jefferson Williams. I'm a geologist. I work in an area of studying the acoustic properties of sediments. So I read that and I thought, oh my God, that's a description of an earthquake and an aftershock. And as a geologist, I could figure out if that happened. The Dead Sea had a very complete earthquake record. The greatest earthquake record on Earth was contained in the sediments of the Dead Sea. And there was an earthquake from around the time Jesus died, an earthquake known as the Jerusalem Quake. So I went down to the Dead Sea and looked for that earthquake. The first thing I worked out was the magnitude. And the magnitude of the Jerusalem Quake was about a 6.5, and it was centered in the south part of the Dead Sea. Now, by the time the shaking got to Jerusalem, say 30, 40 miles away, it wouldn't have been as intense as at the epicenter. But it was sufficient shaking to create the effects described in Matthew. Then later I worked on trying to figure out the year. Dead Sea sediments are varved. This is an example from the Jordanian side. These are light and dark layers, and each one of these light and dark layers represents approximately 1 year of deposition. And then in between these light and dark layers are these deformed layers. They're deformed by earthquakes. And you can count these layers like tree rings. So the Dead Sea has a chronological record of past earthquakes with pretty good precision. I counted the varves up to the Jerusalem Quake at a location called En-Gedi, and I came up with a date of 31 AD, plus or minus 5 years. In other words, between 26 and 36 AD. I published that in a peer-reviewed journal in 2012. So 26 to 36 AD is when Pontius Pilate was ruling Judea. And that's also the time when Jesus died. Now I'm trying to figure out what time of year the earthquake occurred. You see, in the Dead Sea, because it's a dry area, when there's an earthquake, it kicks up a dust cloud. And the dust cloud will form a thin draping of dust right on top of the seismically deformed layer. And that dust cloud pulls dust and pollen off of the ground. And that pollen tells us the time of year, because certain plants are blooming at certain times of year, and that's the pollen that's on the ground. The greatest clue we have in the biblical account is the time of year. It's not very specific on the year he died. It gives us clues that we have to do detective work on. But the time of year is very specific. It's the 14th or 15th of Nisan, on a day that we know is Good Friday. And that's in the spring, late March, early April, when there's lots of pollen in the air and when there's lots of pollen on the ground. So the pollen on top of that thin dust cloud layer should tell us what time of year this earthquake struck. After I published my article in 2012, I started working with a professor at Cambridge University in England, and that opened up many, many doors And we were able to recruit the top scientists in every little specialty that we needed: palynology, dust geology, and geochemistry primarily. And we applied for a $1 million grant. And we got to the last stage of the competition, and it was rejected. And it wasn't rejected because of scientific merit. It was rejected because the goals of our research project did not meet the goals of the foundation. It's very difficult to get a grant doing science these days. And to try to get a grant for science studying a biblical text, a biblical story, that's almost impossible. Some people say I should go to a church, but there's a problem there: a potential conflict of interest. Why is it important? I don't know why. I have a drive to try to figure this out. I think it's very important for science to study spirituality, for science to study religion, because I think religion asks the questions we're most interested in. I'm seeking the truth. I'm not seeking to rubber stamp stories that we're handed down. I'm seeking to figure out the truth about stories we're handed down. So that's why I'm going direct to the people, to take it to its conclusion, to try to figure out, was there an earthquake at the crucifixion or not? Was that a fictional story, or was that a real? I don't know what I'll find. When you seek the truth, you don't know what's behind the door. But as a wise soul once said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.